relations with our tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We understand that we must ensure that our institutions provide support, resources, and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for our American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. I am also grateful for our co-sponsors for today's event from the University of Minnesota Office of the President, Executive Vice President and Provost, Office of Human Resources, Office for Student Affairs, Graduate School, Office for Public Engagement, and the Minnesota State Office of Equity and Diversity. Office of Equity and Inclusion, my apologies. Thank you, Andrew. With your partnership in this event, you signal and acknowledge that the institutional and system level is important because of the role leaders play in the mental health, wellness, and well-being of our staff, faculty, and students on all of our campuses. For that, I thank you. It is with a heavy heart that I welcome all of you to this session today, as we recently experienced the senseless killing of Dante Wright in the midst of revisiting the trauma, the violence that many are re-experiencing in the daily unfolding of the Chauvin trial. Pain, anger, fear, frustration, dismay, exhaustion. This is exhausting. We witness and continue to witness Black lives taken by police, violence and hate toward Asian American, Pacific Islanders, and the global pandemic that has exposed vast systemic inequities in our BIPOC communities especially. This is exhausting. Among many steps that we can take to manage our individual well-being, you have taken one today just by being here. Let's be honest, this is probably time, this precious 75 minutes that many of us feel we need to do this, catch up, get some of the work done, but taking the time to even think and feel about how we're doing holistically, mental, the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, is precious time that can sometimes make the difference between health and serious distress. So I thank you for taking that step with all of us today. We would have been pleased as a panel to have 50 to 100 of you in intimate conversations and breakout rooms and exchanges this morning, but unfortunately, 655 of you signed up. That's the reason we ended up having to upgrade our Zoom to a webinar, and I apologize that we cannot see many of you today. So to help you focus, we will not be using the chat space. We invite you to just sit back, relax, focus, and reflect on the conversations among our panelists. Chat spaces sometimes are typically used to welcome questions. We just had many questions. Thank you, everyone, that the panelists have compiled, grouped together, placed into themes, and we will do our best to respond to as many of them as possible. But please forgive us that we will unlikely get to everyone's questions. What this signals to me, to us, to our institutions is that we probably need to do this again. And I hope that we do. Without further ado, please let me introduce the panelists. Our panel moderator today is Dr. Willie Winston III. Dr. Winston is an assistant professor in the Department of Human Services, where he coordinates the leadership and administration program at Metro State University. He received his PhD and his MA in educational psychology with an emphasis on counseling and student personnel psychology from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Also a Master of Science degree in developmental education, focusing on guidance and counseling from Grambling State University in Louisiana. Dr. Winston's practice and research focuses on exposing and eliminating racial ethnic disparities in mental health access and services. Renita Wilson is a licensed independent clinical social worker and board-approved independent clinical supervisor, and currently serves as the clinical director at Kente Circle. Renita has provided service in child welfare service areas, including adoption, foster care, child protection, and children's mental health. Over the last 10 years, Renita has developed a professional perspective and lens to support the clinical development and practice of those seeking to offer mental health services within communities of color. She's an advocate and member of several associations and boards that focus on promoting individual and community health and wellness for African-American families. Thank you for joining us, Renita. Stephen Cambrice is a licensed marriage and family therapist, holding a BA in sociology. Graduate education includes Master of Science in Marriage and Family Therapy. Stephen specializes in cultural competency focused on the impact of trauma in the African-American community, offering therapeutic support to youth and families. He has worked in adolescent day treatment schools and office-based treatment settings. Dr. Rashida Fisher is a counselor, educator, professional counselor, clinical supervisor, and training consultant. Currently, Dr. Fisher is an associate faculty member and serves as the program chair of the Adler Graduate School's counseling program. Dr. Fisher also provides counseling services with Canopy Mental Health and Consulting. Larry Tucker serves as adjunct professor at St. Mary's University's Master's Program for Marriage and Family Therapy. He holds a bachelor's degree in social work from St. John's University and a master's in marriage and family therapy from University of Wisconsin-Stout. He's co-founder and chief executive officer of Kente Circle, LLC, also a 2016 Bush Fellow, businessman, community activist, trainer, and consultant. Larry has dedicated nearly 30 years in the social service field, helping individuals, couples, and families navigate life's challenges. Welcome, Willie, Stephen, Renita, Rashida, Larry. Thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your insights and your wisdom with us. Over to you, Dr. Winston.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me okay? Everybody's good? So I just want to welcome everyone again. We so greatly appreciate you spending some of your day with us to discuss this idea of wellness and self-care. As Michael said, my name is Willie Winston. I'm on faculty here at Metropolitan State University here in St. Paul. I want to set the context a little bit of our conversation today. But first and foremost, we just want to send our most heartfelt thoughts and prayers to the family, to the friends, and to the community of Daunte Wright. Right now, I really don't have any words that's going to adequately address the collective pain we're feeling, the grief and the anger, the numbness that so many of us are experiencing right now. And during these times when we really don't have the words to try to say what's going on, sometimes the most we could do is just be in solidarity with each other. And to that end, I would like to acknowledge that the Indigenous Men of Color, the Indigenous Men and the Men of Color work group here at Minn State is holding a vigil right after our conversation. It's starting around 12:15 to about 1:30. And this will be both a virtual and an in-person vigil located at North Hennepin Community College, which is on the corner of 85th Avenue and Broadway. And you can Google Indigenous Men and Men of Color, Minn State, find their Facebook, and you will be able to find the links to where you can attend virtually. I also would like to acknowledge our panelists. Mr. Stephen Cambrice, Ms. Renita Wilson, Mr. Larry Tucker, Dr. Rashida Fisher, for being willing and brave enough to be part of this, what I call authentic conversation about wellness and self-care. You know, when Michael reached out to me about 3 weeks ago now to discuss his vision of the space that we're in right now, he made sure I knew that we wanted this to be a space of encouragement and a space of hope to our BIPOC communities, and to our allies. At that time, we were focusing on the start of the trial for Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. We were just starting to hear about the horrible incidences of hate and violence towards the AAPI individuals and communities, the Asian American Pacific Islanders communities. That was front and center. That was just starting to be part of the news story. And so when this situation happened on Sunday, it just put us in all of just a very different space. But we still want to maintain that idea of hope and encouragement as we think about how we take care of ourselves. It was very interesting because when Michael reached out to me, I had just read an article, it was just a small piece, in this magazine called Family Therapy Magazine. And it was a piece by Dr. Jocelyn Armstrong of Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. Now, Dr. Clark focuses on research narratives of African-American men, fathers, specifically fathers with families. But her title to this particular piece caught my eye. And I must admit, we took a little bit from that for our title for our presentation today. But her title was called This Ish, I-S-H, is Exhausting. Acknowledging the emotional labor of Black MFTs, which means marriage and family therapists. And if you get the opportunity, I would really encourage you to find that article. It actually speaks to many of the questions or some of your questions, especially for those of you who are in the human services field, those of you who are practitioners, those of you who are BIPOC individuals. A lot of your questions she tries to answer, even though she was writing a love letter to MFT therapists. The other thing that caught my eye about this particular article was that the quote that she started off with. The quote was by a poet, writer, feminist, womanist, Audre Lorde. Some of you may know her. And a lot of people use this quote to think about self-care. Audre says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And it is an act of political warfare. And many of the questions that we got, and we got about 40 to 50 questions from you all, asked, how do we do this? How do we try to keep the joy within our lives when things around us seem so dire? And so that's where I want to bring in our panelists and ask them about how they're able to do it. These are the people who are on the front line every day doing the work, but also being a part of the communities that are struggling so much with what's going on in our society. So I will bring it to our panelists and just start with asking them to respond to some of the themes that we got from many of you. And I'll start with this question here, and anybody can jump in and respond. So we know that there's no magic pill for wellness and self-care. Many of the strategies we talk about, such as getting proper sleep, eating healthy, exercising, these are things that we know about. But with the multiple stresses going on and the trauma-inducing events happening nearly on a daily basis, how do you center yourselves and anchor your own wellness? How do you center yourselves and anchor your own wellness? So anyone, let's start this conversation off.
Do we all want to just jump in?
Yeah, Renita, why don't you start?
Well, I mean, I think you said a little bit already, Dr. Willie, with respect to how we initially planned for this, and then what has currently happened. So how do I balance myself? How do I center myself? Today, answering that is very different than how I would have answered that last Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
So today, I'm answering that with the acknowledgement that I'm still trying to center myself. To our panel prior to this time being started, I had to acknowledge that I'm still vacillating with the rawness of what has happened. But part of that process is, for myself, and I would encourage anyone else, is to acknowledge your emotions. Just acknowledge that there is some feelings there and what those might be. Again, if I were to answer this question last week, my response might be a little bit different, a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more reflective, versus today. It's still raw. It's still close to what happened. So yeah, I think I'll just kind of name that: acknowledging your emotions, what that means for you, the honesty around it, and being able to do so, whether it's in my personal space or my professional space.
Yeah.
Because both of those hold true. We have, I think there's always been a tendency to believe we leave our personal stuff at the door, we compartmentalize, we go to work, we do it, we hit our tasks.
Right.
And all the while, our emotions and things that are real and true for us somehow get shut off. And I don't believe that to be true. Yeah. So I'll just start there and offer space for others to chime in.
I'm gonna ask Steve to talk about it a little bit. I know you're itching to talk. So go ahead, Steve, talk about it.
Okay, Doc, thanks for having me. And it's an honor to sort of be able to have this discussion with colleagues like you guys. And I'm just feeling the safety of the connection I feel with you guys as part of that management. I think wellness is multifaceted, so when, especially in the African-American community, we often find when we are caught up in, or when we're faced with disruptions in our social being, right, in our social wellness, we're able to find reserves and resourcefulness and even a sort of replenishment in a spiritual wellness. So when the area of our social wellness is disrupted, we look to areas of intellectual wellness, we look to areas of spiritual wellness, we look for areas of other areas, maybe in a smaller micro group, for environmental wellness. So I think wellness is multifaceted, and we want to be aware of all those areas of wellness, so that when my social or environmental wellness is disrupted, how am I doing spiritually? How am I doing physically? How am I doing intellectually? And we look to get grounded in those other areas of wellness. And this is practiced by Dr. Golden at North Point Health and Wellness. She's an advocate of a multifaceted approach to wellness, and we're finding that that kind of guidance and those kinds of resources are extremely helpful for people to see the multifaceted aspects of wellness, because we're triggered into being caught up in some of the traumatic events, which happens in trauma, right? Trauma can pull us in and rob us of the present. And so just being able to have that recognition of a multifaceted approach to wellness, I think is helpful, especially in
I like that.
this.
Mhm.
I like that. And actually I wrote that down as you were talking, this multifaceted approach. I think it's something that we really need to kind of pay attention to and figure out how that works within our own lives. And I'm gonna give Rashida or Larry the opportunity to jump in if you want. Otherwise, we can kind of go on.
Yeah, I would just say, I like what Renita and Steve have said. And I think that for me, listening to them triggered this idea of living into our truth,
Mhm.
being able to, show up how we need to, which I think as, BIPOC folks and, professionals doing the work that we do is a complicated task. It's hard to show up and hold space for others while we're also struggling with, being traumatized by what's happening and by what could happen to us
Yes.
as Black folks, as a Black man. The images that we see in the media are people that look like me. George Floyd was killed down the street from where I work.
Right.
Dante Wright was killed down the street from where I live, literally, and so it's all around me. And so it is a constant battle to be thinking about and trying to live into and lean into, what is my truth? How do I need to show up? How do I need to take care of myself? One of the things that I'm, that I know we're wrestling with as a society right now is, seeing young people protest. And I actually, I struggle with it from the standpoint that I worry about those young folks or, all of the folks who are out there protesting, because, I just do. But at the same time, I worry about their safety. And I admire, how we all can show up and kind of speak our truth. And I think protesting is one way of doing that. It's one way of voicing and responding to, ongoing abuse and trauma, and our fight to be heard. And
Yes.
and I think this pursuit of trying to get to a place where we're not just surviving, but we're really trying to thrive.
Yeah. Okay.
I will just add and kind of echo what has already been said. The concept of authentic truth. Dr. Winston, you using the quote by Audre Lorde is actually quite fitting and quite profound, because as helping professionals and those of you that are entering the field of being a helping professional, and people in the community, BIPOC community, we have been conditioned to ignore our feelings and to show up in spite of discomfort, in spite of not feeling well and not being treated well. And so the radical idea, the political warfare of fighting against that and saying, you know what? Yes, I do have this responsibility, and today I cannot meet that need, and I'm not going to try because I need to preserve my own health and wellness.
Yeah.
And showing our humanity, acknowledging our humanity, to Renita's point, is really important. And that's about boundaries. And as BIPOC people, we have been taught not to hold healthy boundaries with our family, in our workspace. We go over and above and beyond to show, to dispel all of the, myths about who we are.
Right.
And if we begin to acknowledge our own humanity and demand by radical self-care that we are human and that we need to be treated that way, instead of pretending and putting on the facade and worrying ourselves and working ourselves literally to death, you know, then maybe we'll get somewhere. I also want to echo, because, you know, the question and the premise of the question is to go beyond the basics. And I just think that that's really a bad idea, to
Yeah.
overlook the basics of quality sleep, of quality eating, which is an issue in many communities, access to healthy foods,
I love it.
and all of those things. The basics are vital for our well-being. As mental health professionals, we know when you don't eat well, when you don't sleep well, when you're not hydrated, you don't have the proper nutrients in your body, then you experience mental health symptoms.
Right.
So if you don't have the internal resources of what your body naturally does to maintain wellness and health, everything else is going to be insufficient anyway.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you pointing that out.
For me, I know they're the first to go. I'm anxious, my mind is worrying, I don't sleep well. I forget to eat. I forget to drink water. I forget to go on that walk and do that exercise. And then it catches up to me and I have migraines for 3 days in a row, right? So keeping your body well functioning is critical to being able to combat everything else that's going on.
Right, right. You know, I've been doing a lot of reading over this past year, actually. There's a lot of that people can find around self-care and mental health if you just kind of dig a little bit. Given the pandemic and all the things going on in our society, a lot of people are writing about this idea of self-care. And some people call it a moral imperative that we take care of ourselves, right? It's not just something that you need to do just to kind of maintain, but it's imperative that we make sure that we are taking care of ourselves first before we try to take care of other people. I want to go back because several people had questions about this idea of taking care of yourself, having joy in your life, but feeling guilty of the joy that you have, even through all of what's going on, all of the pain, right? How do you maintain your joy when all that is happening is about destruction? Larry, I see you shaking your head. How do you do that?
Oh man.
Well, let me just say one other thing, because this has triggered me. I have a colleague, and someone also wrote this as a question. She said, as an example, I feel afraid of the police from watching the news, from accessing social media, even though I know statistically it's very low or chance that I may be impacted by police brutality. But this person wavered between, I want to make sure I'm taking care of myself, right? But I kind of feel a little bit guilty when I'm taking care of myself with all that's going on.
Yeah.
How would you help that person, Larry?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hear a couple questions in there. I hear something about, you know, you asking about how do you maintain your joy, you know?
Yeah.
And then I hear, you know, self-care. What does that look like? And you know, honestly, it's been hard to maintain myself, you know, my joy. You know, when I see, you know, images of myself, you know, dying and getting killed, you know, and you know, people constantly questioning, you know, what did those people do to cause that to happen? It's hard. You know, when my own kids, you know, have to leave my house, or, you know, they don't live with me actually, you know, and I can't have my hands on them, you know, you know, that's scary for me. However, you know, I think self-care needs to look different for all of us. And I think we live in a society that tries to tell us what, what, good mental health looks like, what normal looks like, for all of us. And, that is a false idea. We are all unique individuals, and we have to be able to kind of name and develop and understand what is it about us that we need to do to have good self-care. For some people, for me, it's walking, it's being outside, it's riding my bike, it's being in nature. Sometimes it's being with people, sometimes it's
not being with people.
I don't want to talk to y'all today,
Right.
Which, I know is an odd thing to say when you're a mental health, talk therapist.
Well,
but sometimes I don't want to talk to people. I just want to be by myself, to collect my thoughts. Sometimes for folks, it's, it's a holistic thing. I think sometimes it's about, some people might need to work a little bit more. Some people might need to not work. We should be able to name that, and we shouldn't be guilted into, either of those places. I think in this field, one of the challenges that, I certainly struggle with as a mental health professional is, am I doing enough? Should I be doing more? And that's been my struggle, frankly, throughout my career. It's an ongoing thing that I'm learning that I'm wrestling with and giving myself, more and more permission as I understand the challenges of just showing up, and sometimes that has to be enough. So I don't know. I think, I'll open it up to others, but I think it's a complicated mix of things.
And let me just throw one other thing in there. How much is too much ownership to bear? So going from what Larry has just shared with us, Renita, how much is too much ownership to bear? Because we get asked to do a lot.
Well, yes, we get asked to do a lot and then some.
Right.
And then some more. That ownership, that too sounds like, a complex question, to answer. I think sometimes for me, what comes up for me is the idea of, just those messages that we've been taught about giving and, and doing for others. And their strength. And if we don't, who will? And therefore we're responsible. There's some responsibility in that. And with come responsibility, not being able to execute that or maintain that, there's a lot of guilt and shame in that. And so we know we only have, a certain level of capacity, but how often do we have those messages that you still have to give? Whether you have grown up spiritually or connected to some church or whatnot, there's these messages around continuing to give. And taking back some of that, the idea of ownership of having to do everything for everyone all the time. It reminds me of the, initial question about self-care and how self-care can feel selfish for some. Versus it really being about, taking care of yourself, prioritizing what's important for you.
You talk about we have a certain level of capacity, right? I don't know if some of us think that we are superhumans, Steve. The idea that
you don't know if some of us think that or I know a lot of people who walk around with them S t-shirts on their chest.
And capes and all of it, right? But the idea that we've been told a lot by different people, even people within our own families, that you have to do more, you have to be better.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people don't quite understand this idea of how much I have versus how I need to replenish. Steve, help us kind of unpack that a little bit. This idea of capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the recognition that even compassion has to have a boundary. I'm experiencing multiple things throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year. I'm not only acknowledging the traumatic events that enter into my awareness. I'm also acknowledging the joy as well as the pain.
Right.
So it's a matter of I think arriving at a place where you recognize the appropriateness of boundaries around your compassion. And the other thing is, I think it's just a recognition of I don't think the African American community is asking you to be connected to trauma. Right? There are multiple aspects of my being that we can connect from, and I'm not, and without avoiding those traumatic events, without avoiding the experience or the reality of unfortunate experiences, I also want to be able to sort of shift, right? To be able, muscles don't only contract, but we have to also release the tension in those muscles, and we have to do that emotionally and socially as well. So I think it's a matter of being connected to experiences of all kinds, recognizing them for what they are, the humanity of them, and realizing that my connectedness to to any community, any marginalized community, isn't a deficit-based, traumatizing connection. There are things to be celebrated in all people. We have these polarizing events that again pull us in. But the idea is to maintain a sense of balance and a recognition of all experiences, and not to reject or avoid or even to hang on to any kind of experience, but to allow the process of shifting, the process of varied experiences, being connected and genuinely feeling and expressing whatever the experience is bringing up in me. And being able to recognize that not one experience totalizes me as an individual, or one experience doesn't totalize the identity of our nation as well.
I love that. Yeah. Dr. Fisher, did you want to put in anything at that?
Well, I mean, there's so much to be said, and all of what's already been expressed is perfect. I guess what I would add is, as BIPOC people, we are a collective people, right? We believe in the I am, therefore we are, and we are, therefore I am, and that can foster a lot of unhealthy codependence and enmeshment. And so what I've heard is, in that question of, I'm feeling okay, and I feel I am experiencing joy, even though everybody around me, is having a hard time, or not as much as I'm not experiencing the trauma as much as everyone else and feeling guilty. And I think that can be fostered by families and communities that train us to have our feelings being contingent upon the well-being of others. And to a certain extent, to echo what Stephen said, being compassionate and having empathy and sympathy for our fellow human beings and our family and friends. Yes, we want to care about them and feel their pain and be there to support them. And their feelings don't have to dictate ours as individuals. And I think learning self-care, practicing self-care gives us permission to be okay even when other people are not. But then also, I think of the idea of it's both and. That one community or one person or one situation is bad. Maybe you perceive it as not as bad as yours, but that doesn't minimize your pain, and it shouldn't compromise your happiness or your joy either.
Great.
But that's hard to live out day to day. So I'm not saying that's an easy mindset to maintain.
Right,
It's
right.
context for pushing back on what we internalize and then act out.
Mhm.
Okay,
Dr. Winston, can I add
sure,
to
sure.
Dr. Rashida just reminded me of, I think you had asked Larry about it, but just the idea of joy and prioritizing it. We think about joy as, it's something we discover or an afterthought or a reflection, but being intentional about prioritizing it. I think about where we are in our current society around being prioritizing the knowing, whether it be through technology or the idea of being woke, being a change agent. I mean, we prioritize these parts or these pieces of us that we feel are really important around what's happening in our society and what's happening in the world, and we prioritize that through our work, through our personal lives, and I'm just naming that prioritizing joy is just as important to accommodate and be intentional about that balance that Dr. Rashida is mentioning.
And you also hit on something that Dr. Jocelyn Armstrong, who wrote this piece, talks about as well. This idea that, it certainly can be difficult for us during times like we're in right now to want to, experience pleasure or joy with all the pivotal things going on in our society. That's very difficult for us sometimes to even process, right? But the idea of we have to be intentional about how we engage in the things that we do, right? So that we can keep doing the things that we do every day. I really love, I think Rashida, you had mentioned the fact, one of you had mentioned the fact that if we really deplete ourselves, we're not going to be good for us, our family, or no one else. Certainly not our clients that we see on a daily basis, who come to us with the expectation that we have space for them, right? And so it's important, it's pivotal that we make sure that we reserve space for ourselves so that we could do that. I have another question that someone wrote into us. Very, very wonderful question. It says that I'm curious about recognizing the need for personal self-care while also recognizing that much of the trauma experienced by marginalized or oppressed people is systemic, i.e. ongoing outside of the sphere of the one-on-one. Where do we start with developing the collective support when all of the environment around us that we're in, i.e. work, maybe even community, may be one that lacks meaningful intentions to support BIPOC individuals? I mean, this is a deep question. It's a really deep question. It goes to the systemic nature of what we experience on a daily, for many of us, we're experiencing on a daily basis, right? So where do we start? Larry.
Well, that's a big question, Dr. Willie, and I don't know if I can do it justice in terms of answering it, but I think, part of what I've tried to do, is, really kind of be on this journey of self-discovery and relationship with myself, so that I know what I need, and I began to seek out spaces and relationships that can support those needs. And I like that. Whether it's people at work who I'm working with, people who I get together and play poker with, or if it's even potentially clients or people that I supervise, how am I being intentional about the relationships that I'm entering based on what I know about myself. Because it's there in those spaces where I have to be able to speak my truth. And how I deal with some of the challenges, you know, in the world, racism, you know, sexism, you know, all the isms, is I try to leverage my relationships with those people to help them see, you know, something different from what they might be, you know, kind of espousing or communicating, you know, so I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, the question that comes into my mind is that this has to happen really, you know, before crises come about.
Yes.
You know, you can't just really, you know, develop these relationships only when crises happen.
That's right.
You have to be a critical part of who you are and where you get your energy from.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that yes, right on, because one of the things that I think, you know, we've experienced at Kente, or I've experienced certainly, is, you know, we've gotten lots of people who've, you know, in the state of the crisis, you know, are now reaching out for help, you know, and support. And our capacity obviously is limited, you know. And so, you know, I am less apt to jump into new relationships with organizations or maybe even clients, you know, when I know that my capacity is already low, right? So I think one of your questions in there talked about, you know, or that one of the people had wrote in about was, you know, how do you address or be in relationship or hold space for people who have racist beliefs or beliefs that are politically different than yours. And for me, that's done in the context of a relationship. You know, so I'm not right now, with where I am in my level of capacity, probably not going to be taking on, you know, too many white clients, you know, or supervisees or new organizational folks, because of what I understand about racism and people's intentions. And so, because for me, what's important is to be able to, you know, take care of myself and not be responsible for someone else. Because that's not what therapy is about. It's not being responsible for somebody else. It's not taking care of them. It's not fixing their life for them. It's helping them, you know, get to where they want to be, and where they say they want to be, you know. And so I think for me, I try to leverage the relationships to help speak to some of those challenging ideas.
Perfect.
You know, if we're in a relationship, and I started out with, you know, whoever I'm going into relationship, whether it's a corporate client or an individual therapy client or a supervisee client, I talk about the relationship and what that means. It doesn't mean that, you know, I'm going to come in and just say to you what you want me to say. You know, I'm going to say to you what I think it is you are asking me to say and to think about beyond potentially what you're aware of.
Right. Being very authentic about it. I appreciate that. Steve, what do you?
Yeah, you know, I was thinking a little bit about it, and I like what Larry said early on. You know, I mean, our institutions, you know, when we say institution, we think of brick and mortar, right? Our institutions are made up of hair, skin, eyeballs, organs, right? Our institutions made up of people. And so one of the early recognitions, you have W.E.B. Du Bois and the Souls of Black Folk talking about a kind of double consciousness, right?
Mhm.
And within the realm of that double consciousness, I am not defined by the external institution. Right? I'm defined by my own being. I'm self-defined. I'm self-aware. Therefore, I'm going to be defined by myself. Now, with that comes the awareness that I'm also participating with others in this. In just the experience of life is an experience of social engagement, spiritually, all those other areas we mentioned earlier about wellness. So for me. In terms of dealing with an institution, I am not defined by an institution, right? I mean, the recognition that the courtroom, whatever the institution might be, a hospital, whatever schools, education, but whatever the institution is, I am not defined by that institution. And the other is the recognition that institutions are made up of people. So in my own person, am I aware of my own biases? Am I aware of the parts of me that carry hate, or parts of me that carry rage? And am I attending to those aspects of myself as a form of self-care, so that I am prepared and balanced to be ready to hold what the client is holding, and also to hold with what I'm holding at the same time. You know, and we get a little bit of that with Ken Hardy's work, being able to hold what other is holding and maintain my own sense of balance. So I think an important aspect of that is what Larry mentioned earlier, and that is, how am I defined? Am I externally defined? This plaintiff, inmate, defendant, suspect? Am I defined by those terms, or am I defined? Do I have an inner definition of my being, with the recognition that I still have to navigate this world of institutional concepts, but my being is rooted in a self-referred definition of who I am.
Perfect.
I'd like to jump in and just add and echo that who we are and how we see ourselves is multiplied and really is created by our experiences interacting with those systems that are made up of people. And so I really love what Larry started off with, is that there has to be intentional creation of community or relationships that help you experience your environment differently, that will help you move out of being defined by the negative experiences of interacting with those institutions. You know, that Stephen mentioned, being, you know, a person involved in the criminal justice system, child protection system, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to also, if we don't want to live and continually navigate oppressive systems, then I think we have to be intentional about creating meaningful relationships once a person has been vetted, that are cross-cultural.
That's right.
Because too often we just by convenience, we are creatures of habit, and we interact with, we work with, we have social time with people that are in our immediate proximity. And so to create meaningful, supportive relationships that help you navigate systems differently and begin to see yourself differently is really important. So create your community that decreases the sting, if you will, I'm losing my words, of that trauma and of that oppression. And be intentional, you know, to Renita's point, be intentional about creating experiences that counter what you get from those negative experiences. Create your joy, create your happiness, and don't sacrifice it.
Right, right. I think you did answer a question or two that some people had regarding how do I show up for those that are not like myself, right? One question asked about how for coworkers of a different racial background, how do I support their histories, right? How do I actually talk to a colleague about their mental health or about my mental health. And I think the idea that it's just not going to happen if you don't have that relationship with them, right? You have to really develop that, and it takes time to do that. But I want to get to, and I'm watching the time, Michael. I know you're going to pop on here in a second, but I want to get to one other question, because I thought this was a wonderful question that we want to try to get you guys to think about and answer. It says that we have gone through a lot this year. COVID-19 has shown a light on inequities that existed, especially for Black, brown, and poor communities. As mental health experts, were there services before COVID-19 that addressed secondary trauma specifically for Black and brown communities in regards to police brutality? And I would say other isms that are happening. And do you think that there will be services in the near future that work towards filling in the gaps that address the secondary trauma that Black and brown communities endure as they watch people like them get killed often by police?
I will say for many Black and brown people that choose to move, work in the counseling profession or the helping professions, that's always one of the primary motivators, is to help with the liberation of their people, whichever, Black or brown community you come from, understanding those dynamics and being intentional about including those experiences and addressing those experiences as people are coming in for relationship issues and work issues and all of that, that it's always an element that is addressed. I think the news media and things like that have created federal funding streams to name it that and get extra financial resources to support those efforts. So I think, this is kind of a political question that we could go down a rabbit hole with answering. And I would also say that while Black and brown people don't always directly experience police brutality, I would never categorize it as secondary trauma because of the real belief and statistical plausibility that it could be you, which then constitutes it as a primary trauma that could lead to PTSD or some trauma-related diagnosis.
Gotcha.
So I think it's always primary.
There's a bit of implicitness even in the question as well, Dr. Winston, and I think the implicitness is our acceptance of our separation. If I'm identifying as African American male, am I disidentified with German and female? I think one of the things to be attuned to is this separation and individualism, and even in that extended individualism being, sort of contained in the extended identity of Black American or African American. Just a recognition that within the confines of that identity is a wall that separates me from others who may identify as something different. And that difference can trigger a fear. That difference can trigger sort of a need to protect my own sense of identification. I don't want that identification to be marred by other identifications I may not relate to as well. So I think part of it is when I'm asking a question, and I'm asking the question outside of it, I'm asking the question as it pertains to an African American male. I think there's a little bit of issue with that because I have to see myself in it. If I'm not seeing myself in it, if I don't have to see myself as being identified in a category that's maintained as African American male, but I have to see myself in the category of in need of fairness, in need of justice. And what's it like if I haven't experienced that injustice directly? How do I connect to that, right, in a way that doesn't trigger shame, how can I connect to that with the acknowledgement that we're all in need of a felt sense of justice. Justice or injustice isn't specific to African-American males. Justice, we all want justice, right? So what we're talking about is not something that is only an issue for certain groups of people. This is an issue of our existence. This is an issue that has to do with our humanity. So to approach it as a human issue and not as an ethnic or gender-oriented problem, I think is also important in order for us to maintain our connectedness to it, even when it's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if I can add to what's coming up for me as I'm hearing you speak, Steve. Just this connectedness and recognition from a human perspective. That means we're all in this. We talked about a little earlier around recognizing our own sense, our own emotions, what's coming up for us, but also the idea of exploring and being curious and acknowledging what's happening around us. I'm thinking about a class I had last night, and one of the themes or topics that came up is that some people don't have to even think about it. We're talking, there's a lot of what we're saying and we already know. We already know exactly what's being said and what's not being said. And I would imagine there's about 300 plus, some of these folks who are here might not know exactly or can connect to what we're talking about, because it's outside of them. Yeah, it applies humanly, but that's not my world. I'm a teacher at the university and I'm teaching political science and I'm just trying to do my stuff. And I got students who are, have experienced this or that, or, have expressed being traumatized. And how do I, what do I do with that?
Right.
How do I hold space for that? How do I have a conversation about that with my own stuff in mind? And, how do I, hold space for empathy? Because that feels real uncomfortable. And the idea of having, empathy can be, an uncomfortable dichotomy within, who we're talking about and the different places and spaces that we're in, where we hold. So I just wanted to echo what you're saying, Stephen, and I think add to that this isn't just about conversations about BIPOC people. This is about everybody. Faculty, staff, students, communities, all of those people, and those are all folks who represent institutions that we're naming, not brick and mortar, but the people who make up the institutions.
Yeah.
So just wanted to fold that into what you were saying, Steve.
And I know Larry wants to jump in here, but Larry, I want to, because we're running a little short on time. And so you can say whatever it is you want to say, but I want everybody to think about what would be the final thing that you want to share with people. What would you want people to know? What do you want people to take out of this as we kind of wrap this up? So I'm going to let Larry go first.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think what I want to say kind of connects with that. I want to touch on what everybody just said, and in particular, Dr. Rashida, this idea of, people come into this field, particularly, people of color, BIPOC folks. And I think as Ms. Renita was saying, teachers and professors, we all come into this for a reason, right? And it is I think, we come in because we want to liberate our people. I like that. And I think, my encouragement for each of us, me too, is that we have to liberate ourselves, first. And when we can do that, then we might have a chance of being able to liberate somebody else. The other thing about, whether or not these services will, be around, be careful, and part of being careful is being, is that liberation journey, right? So the more you know about yourself, the more your eyes are open, the more you'll be able to see. Be careful about the current shiny objects and, offers to help and support, offers to spend money, that will go away, how will you continue to be who you are? and live into, you know, what makes you you and you special without those dollars. And some of that funding is about, you know, we want you to do it this way or that way, which is grounded in a system that doesn't work, that hasn't worked for our people or for white people. And so we have to be careful about you know, that support. I'm not saying don't take it, you know, certainly, but, you know, how do you take it? How do you receive it? Is, you know, what do you use it for? How is it going to set you up for,
Right.
you know, what we will do, which is we will continue to do this work for ourselves and for our communities.
Thank you. Let's see, Steve, final thoughts.
I think because it seems to be evident that we're locked into our individualism, you know, our individualism, a contradiction in itself. I think given that happening within our being, that I'd have to go along with some of the things you might hear from Gandhi, or you heard from Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Howard Thurman, and that is the greatest revolution is an internal one. You know, I mean, I want to liberate myself. I need to have an internal self revolution, a revolution within my being. And I think when we are able to do that within the context of our individualism, it could offer a kind of freedom that might help us to connect to each other in a much more healthy way. And again, I also want us to also recognize that the polarizing of events and the continued sort of onslaught that we have when these events happen, in some ways, in many ways, does not represent the core relationships that we all experience as Americans on a day-to-day basis. So I think, again, I would encourage people to in the context of approaching an institution, approach your own institution first, your own internal institution, and with the recognition that your individualism and the protection of that individualism is part of what leads to some of the traumatic events and the ongoing unfortunateness of some of those events.
Rashida.
Yeah, I would echo that. That it's just really important to take care of yourself. I love the quote. I actually wrote it down, that the greatest liberation is an internal one. And it reminded me of another one that I'm ad-libbing from Alfred Adler, that basically says, care for others, but take you with you, right? That idea that to care for others doesn't necessarily mean and should not mean sacrifice of yourself in the process. And I think, again, as you know, members of communities of color, BIPOC is the new fancy term, we have been conditioned to know that caring for others necessarily means sacrificing ourselves in the process. We see it in all of our great leaders that, you know, they're and we have to change that narrative, that we can preserve ourselves and support others in the process with limits.
It's a journey. It's right. Renita.
Oh, goodness. I mean, I'm not sure what else more I can add. I think the individual and collectivism, you know, knowing what is that mission? What does that look like? How do you as an individual and internally support that? And what does that look like for those people you are in relationship with?
Yeah.
Just to, you know, continue to explore that as a journey.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to share with people that you're not alone in this process. You really are not alone. Finding the right community to be involved in and being intentional about it, not being pretentious about it, right? Not just when something you know, happened and you feel that you should be doing something. Try to do something when things are not so at such a high level the way they are right now. And the last thing that I will just reiterate is that being a part of this vigil that's coming up here in the next few minutes, the Indigenous men and men of color, men's state is something that you can be a part of that I think will help with that anyway. And so with that, turn it over to Michael for any final thoughts.
It's really hard to add final thoughts. Thank you, Dr. Willie, Dr. Rashida, Larry, Renita, Stephen. We are indebted to you. We appreciate you. We thank you for the work that you do, but more importantly, I feel like I'm grateful for the people you are, and then your emphasis on relationships and how you build that, not just with your clients, but with your communities, and how you've done that and shared of yourself today. Everybody's quoting a lot of people, and I appreciate, Audre Lorde being brought up. I'm going to get this one wrong, but I think they said something about speaking and being afraid of our words because we're not sure if people will hear us or people will welcome our words. But I think they said that when we are silent, we remain afraid. So it is better to speak. And for that reason, I thank each one of you for speaking and for speaking the truth. I think something else Audrey also said is what is it? Caring for yourself is not about self-indulgence, it's about self-preservation, and it is an act of political warfare. I think that's my unfortunate paraphrase of that. So I thank everyone who is in attendance today. I thank you for coming, for listening, for receiving some of these insights that may or may not be personally meaningful for each one of you. But I hope you heard what everyone is saying. If you ever feel like you've reached your last straw, there are many people around you, and definitely people on this room, people that signed up, that want to give you another straw, because there is a lot of meaning, a lot more relationships to have, that there is hope, and we hope that you'll reach out to individuals who can either be a resource to you or who can point you to resources. I also want to leave a word to those here that either by their title, by their position, who have power, who have privilege, to take the responsibility that we can create workspaces, institutions, policies that help make our organizations, our institutions, our system racially, socially just, equitable, and a more welcoming community for everyone. So with that, I thank every one of you for attending, and I wish you all the best, and hope that you will continue to take care. Thank you.